Charleston, South Carolina, August 1873. In the sweltering heat of a summer evening, something occurred at the Pemberton estate that would baffle investigators for over a century. A jewel worth more than most plantations, a sapphire so rare that European royalty had bid fortunes for it, vanished from a locked room under impossible circumstances. Within 3 months, 4 people connected to the estate would be dead. Within a year, the Pemberton family fortune would be completely destroyed, their mansion abandoned, their name whispered only in connection with madness and murder. The Charleston Police Department's files from that period contain a curiosity that has puzzled historians ever since. 7 pages of the official investigation report were removed, cut cleanly from the binding as if someone wanted to erase specific testimony from the record. What was on those pages? What witness account was so dangerous that it had to be physically excised from history? Before we unravel the mystery of what became known in Charleston society as the Sapphire Cipher, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit that notification bell, because the truth behind this impossible theft involves secret societies, forbidden love, and a revenge plot so intricate that even today, criminologists study it as one of the most sophisticated crimes ever committed in American history. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love connecting with history enthusiasts across the country. The story begins not with the theft itself, but with the Sapphire's arrival in Charleston 6 months earlier. In February of 1873, the jewel came from Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka, where it had been discovered in 1868 by British colonial mining operations. The stone was extraordinary, a 247-carat star sapphire of such perfect clarity and color that gemologists who examined it declared it without equal in the known world. The sapphire's surface displayed a phenomenon called asterism, a 6-pointed star that seemed to float beneath the stone's surface, shifting and glowing as light moved across it. In certain illumination, witnesses claimed the star appeared almost 3-dimensional, as though you could reach into the stone and touch it. The effect was so mesmerizing that several people reported feeling disoriented after staring at it for extended periods, as though the stone itself exerted some hypnotic influence. The British East India Company initially planned to present the sapphire to Queen Victoria, but political complications intervened. The stone's discovery had occurred in territory where colonial authority was contested, and questions arose about rightful ownership. Rather than risk an international incident, the company quietly sold the sapphire through a London dealer to a private buyer. That buyer was Harrison Pemberton III, patriarch of one of Charleston's oldest and wealthiest families. The Pembertons had survived the Civil War with their fortune remarkably intact, having diversified their investments into northern banks and international shipping before the conflict began. While other Southern aristocrats watched their wealth evaporate with Confederate currency and lost plantations, the Pembertons emerged from Reconstruction actually wealthier than before. Harrison was 58 years old in 1873, a severe man with iron-gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. He'd built his fortune through calculated risk and ruthless business practices that left competitors bankrupt. His wife, Catherine, had died 5 years earlier, leaving him with 3 children who would all play crucial roles in the events that followed. The eldest was Jonathan Pemberton, 32 years old, educated at Harvard, and groomed to inherit the family business empire. Jonathan was everything his father had molded him to be: shrewd, disciplined, emotionally controlled. But those who knew him well detected something hollow in his perfection, as though he'd sacrificed so much of himself to meet his father's expectations that little genuine personality remained. The middle child was Elizabeth Pemberton, 28 years old, and in many ways the most formidable member of the family. Where her brother had submitted to their father's will, Elizabeth had fought it at every turn. She'd scandalized Charleston society by attending lectures on women's suffrage, by refusing 3 marriage proposals from suitable men, by expressing opinions on politics and business that were considered unseemly for a woman of her station. Harrison viewed his daughter with a mixture of pride at her intelligence and frustration at her refusal to conform. The youngest was Thomas Pemberton, just 19 years old, sensitive, artistic, completely unsuited for the business world his father inhabited. Thomas wrote poetry, painted watercolors, and spent his time with a circle of friends his father considered dangerously bohemian. The relationship between Harrison and his youngest son was strained to the point of open hostility. Harrison purchased the Sapphire in January 1873 for the staggering sum of £85,000 sterling, approximately $425,000 at the time. In today's money, adjusted for inflation, that represents a purchase of roughly $12 million. Why would anyone pay such an astronomical price for a single stone? The official explanation, the one Harrison gave to Charleston society, was that the sapphire would serve as the centerpiece of a new jewelry collection being assembled for Elizabeth. She was approaching an age where, despite her resistance, she would need to marry to preserve the family's social position. The sapphire was to be a wedding gift, a stone so magnificent that it would announce the union as one of historic significance. But those closest to Harrison knew the truth was more complex. Harrison Pemberton was obsessed with legacy, with ensuring his family's name would be remembered for generations. The sapphire represented more than wealth. It represented permanence, an object so valuable and so beautiful that it would forever be associated with the Pemberton name. Whoever possessed the stone would automatically become part of history. The sapphire arrived in Charleston in mid-February, transported from London with extraordinary security. Harrison had commissioned a special display case for it, a cube of crystal glass set in a mahogany frame with brass fittings. The case was designed to be locked, with a mechanism so intricate that only Harrison possessed the key. He installed the case in his private study on the 2nd floor of the Pemberton mansion, a room that overlooked the estate's formal gardens. The study was Harrison's sanctuary, where he conducted business, managed investments, and spent hours in contemplation. Access was strictly controlled. Even his children required permission to enter. For 6 months, the sapphire sat in that study, locked in its crystal case, visible to the select few Harrison deemed worthy of viewing it. He hosted small gatherings where he would dramatically unveil the stone, watching his guests' reactions with evident satisfaction. The sapphire became the subject of intense fascination throughout Charleston. Everyone who'd seen it spoke of its beauty with a reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. But not everyone who viewed the sapphire was filled with admiration. Some visitors found it unsettling, even disturbing. There was something about the way the star moved across its surface, something about the depth of the blue color that seemed almost unnatural. A few guests reported feeling dizzy or experiencing strange dreams after viewing it. One visitor in particular found the Sapphire deeply troubling, though he said nothing about his reaction at the time. His name was Daniel Ashford, and his role in what followed would prove absolutely central. Daniel Ashford was not part of Charleston's elite society, though he'd spent years trying to gain acceptance into it. He was 41 years old, a self-made man who'd earned his fortune in cotton trading during and after the war. His background was modest. His father had been a shopkeeper in Savannah, but Daniel had demonstrated a remarkable talent for business and an even more remarkable talent for reading people. By 1873, Daniel owned warehouses throughout the South, controlled shipping contracts that made him indispensable to plantation owners, and had accumulated wealth that rivaled that of old money families like the Pembertons. But wealth alone couldn't buy acceptance into Charleston's most exclusive circles. Those families could trace their lineage back generations. Daniel's success was too recent, too obviously earned through effort rather than inherited through birth. He'd been pursuing Elizabeth Pemberton for 3 years, drawn to her intelligence and independence. Elizabeth had neither encouraged nor discouraged his attention, finding him more interesting than the vapid aristocrats her father preferred she marry, but also recognizing that Daniel's interest was as much about social advancement as genuine affection. Daniel had been present at one of Harrison's Sapphire viewings in May of 1873. He'd stood in the study with a dozen other guests, watching as Harrison unlocked the crystal case and carefully removed the stone, allowing it to pass from hand to hand so each person could examine it closely. When the sapphire reached Daniel, he held it up to the lamplight, watching the stars shift and glow. For just a moment, something flickered across his face, an expression of recognition or perhaps calculation. Then it was gone, replaced by appropriate admiration. "Extraordinary, Mr. Pemberton," Daniel had said, returning the stone. "I can't imagine a more perfect specimen." "Indeed," Harrison replied, locking the sapphire back in its case. "This stone will be in my family for generations. Long after we're all dust, the Pemberton sapphire will endure." The phrase, "the Pemberton sapphire," rankled something in Daniel. The possessiveness of it, the assumption of permanent ownership. But he'd smiled and offered his congratulations on such a magnificent acquisition. That viewing occurred on May 17th. The theft would take place exactly 3 months later, on August 17th. The days leading up to the theft seemed ordinary. Charleston sweltered under late summer heat, the kind of oppressive humidity that made even simple movement exhausting. The Pemberton estate employed a staff of 12, including housekeepers, groundskeepers, a cook, and Harrison's personal secretary, a meticulous man named Albert Graves. Graves was 45 years old, unmarried, completely devoted to Harrison Pemberton and the orderly operation of the household. He'd worked for the family for 15 years, rising from a junior clerk to his current position of trust. Harrison relied on him absolutely, and Graves took pride in his indispensability. On the morning of August 17th, Graves noted in his daily log that Harrison was in excellent spirits. The family patriarch had concluded a profitable business deal the previous day and was planning a dinner party that evening to celebrate. 8 guests had been invited, including Daniel Ashford, the mayor of Charleston, 2 prominent attorneys, and several business associates with their wives. Elizabeth had reluctantly agreed to attend, though she made her displeasure clear. She found her father's dinner parties tedious, hours of conversation about cotton prices and shipping rates, with the women expected to retire to the parlor while the men discussed business over cigars and brandy. Thomas had been ordered to attend as well, though he'd begged off, claiming he had commitments with his artistic friends. Harrison had been furious, delivering a lecture about family duty that ended with Thomas storming from the house. This argument had occurred around 2 p.m. in Harrison's study, with both men's voices carrying through the closed door. Several servants heard the altercation, including a housemaid named Mary Sullivan, whose testimony would later become crucial. Mary was 23 years old, had been working for the Pembertons for 5 years, and was known for being observant and discreet. She'd been dusting in the hallway when the argument erupted and had remained there, uncomfortable about interrupting, but unable to leave without being noticed. She heard Thomas shout something about your precious stone and caring more about jewelry than your own son. She heard Harrison respond with cold fury, saying Thomas was an embarrassment who would never amount to anything. Then Thomas had burst from the study, his face flushed, tears visible in his eyes. He'd rushed past Mary without acknowledging her and disappeared down the stairs. Harrison emerged moments later, his own face tight with anger. He'd looked at Mary and said simply, "Finish your work." Then he'd returned to the study and locked the door behind him. Mary completed her dusting and moved to other parts of the house. She reported later that she'd thought nothing unusual about the incident. Father and son arguments were not uncommon in the Pemberton household. Harrison remained in his study for the rest of the afternoon, emerging only once at around 4 p.m. to speak with Graves about arrangements for the evening's dinner party. He seemed calmer, his focus shifted to the upcoming entertainment. He instructed Graves to ensure the dining room was properly prepared and that the wine cellar was unlocked so appropriate bottles could be selected. At 5:30 p.m., Harrison went upstairs to his bedroom to dress for dinner. He was particular about his appearance, always impeccably groomed. The process typically took him 30 to 40 minutes. At 6 p.m., guests began arriving. Daniel Ashford was among the first, dressed in evening attire, bringing a gift of imported French wine. Elizabeth appeared shortly after, wearing a blue silk gown that one guest later remembered matched, almost exactly the color of the Sapphire. Jonathan arrived from his own residence nearby, where he lived with his wife, Margaret. He'd been working at the family's main office and arrived with business papers he wanted his father to review. Thomas did not appear. His absence was noted but not remarked upon directly. Everyone understood there had been a family dispute. Dinner was served at 6:30 p.m. in the formal dining room. The meal proceeded smoothly, with conversation flowing easily among the guests. Harrison was an attentive host, ensuring everyone's glass remained full and steering discussion toward topics that showcased his own knowledge and success. Several guests later recalled that Daniel Ashford seemed distracted during dinner, contributing little to the conversation and barely touching his food. When Elizabeth asked if he was feeling well, he'd smiled and blamed the heat, claiming the humidity always affected his appetite. Around 8 p.m., after dessert had been served, Harrison invited the male guests to his study for brandy and cigars. This was standard practice, the moment when real business could be discussed away from feminine sensibilities. The women retired to the parlor, where Elizabeth found herself reluctantly playing hostess. offering tea and listening to gossip about absent members of Charleston society. She bore it with visible impatience, checking the clock repeatedly. In the study, Harrison poured brandy and distributed cigars from a humidor on his desk. The crystal case containing the Sapphire sat on a side table, locked as always. Harrison made no mention of it, but several guests' eyes drifted toward it during the conversation. Daniel Ashford positioned himself near the windows, ostensibly to catch whatever breeze might offer relief from the heat. From there he had a clear view of both the crystal case and the study door. The conversation in the study lasted approximately 90 minutes. Business was discussed, political developments debated. Harrison was in his element, dominating the discussion with observations and opinions that others received with appropriate deference. At approximately 9:30 p.m., one of the guests, a lawyer named Reginald Thornton, mentioned needing to depart early as he had court proceedings the following morning. This triggered a general movement toward departure, with other guests agreeing it was getting late. Harrison walked them downstairs, shaking hands, accepting compliments on the dinner, promising to arrange another gathering soon. Daniel Ashford was among the last to leave, taking a moment to speak privately with Elizabeth in the foyer. "I wonder if I might call on you this week," he said quietly. "There's something I'd like to discuss with you, something important." Elizabeth, tired from playing hostess and eager for the evening to end, nodded vaguely. "You may call. Whether I'll receive you depends on my schedule." It was not encouragement, but Daniel smiled as though it were. He departed into the warm night, his carriage disappearing down the tree-lined drive. By 10 p.m., all guests had gone. The household staff began cleaning up, collecting glasses and plates, restoring rooms to order. Harrison went upstairs to his bedroom, instructing Graves to ensure everything was properly secured before the staff retired for the evening. Graves made his rounds, checking doors and windows according to his nightly routine. He noted in his log that all was secure by 10:30 p.m. He then retired to his own quarters in a separate building behind the main house. Elizabeth went to her bedroom on the second floor, exhausted and irritated by the evening's demands. She read for a while before extinguishing her lamp around 11 p.m. Jonathan and his wife had departed immediately after the other guests, returning to their own home. The house settled into silence. Outside, cicadas sang in the humid darkness. Inside, the Pemberton estate seemed a model of security and order. At 6 a.m. the following morning, everything changed. Harrison Pemberton woke at his usual hour, dressed, and went downstairs for breakfast. His routine was invariable. Coffee and toast at 6:30 a.m., then to his study to review correspondence and plan his day's business. At 6:45 a.m., Harrison unlocked his study door and entered the room. 3 seconds later, his scream echoed through the entire house. Elizabeth was still in her nightgown when she rushed to the study. She found her father standing in the center of the room, staring at the crystal case on the side table. The case was still locked. The mahogany frame was intact. The brass fittings showed no signs of tampering. But inside the case, where the sapphire should have been resting on its velvet cushion, there was nothing but empty space. The stone was gone. The impossible had occurred. A 247-carat sapphire had vanished from a locked case in a locked room in a secured house, without leaving any evidence of how it had been removed. Harrison's first action was to search the study himself, convinced the stone must be somewhere in the room. Perhaps it had somehow fallen from the case, though he couldn't imagine how. He tore through papers, opened drawers, checked behind furniture. Nothing. Elizabeth, having overcome her initial shock, began examining the crystal case more carefully. The lock was definitely engaged. She tried opening it and found it secure. Yet the sapphire was unquestionably gone. "Father," she said quietly, "when did you last see the stone?" Harrison thought back. "Yesterday evening. Before the guests arrived, I came in here briefly and glanced at it. It was there then." "Are you certain?" "Absolutely certain. I remember looking at it specifically, wanting to assure myself it was secure before I had visitors in this room. So it disappeared sometime between yesterday evening and this morning." Harrison's face had gone pale. "That's impossible. The study door was locked all night. I locked it myself when I went upstairs. No one has a key except me." "Then how did someone get in?" "Someone didn't get in? They couldn't have, but clearly someone had." Elizabeth suggested they examine the windows. The study had 3 tall windows overlooking the gardens. All 3 were closed and locked from the inside. The locks showed no signs of forced entry. By this time, other members of the household had gathered at the study door, drawn by Harrison's scream. Graves appeared, his usual composure shaken by the sight of his employer in such distress. "Mr. Pemberton, what's happened?" "The sapphire is gone, stolen from my locked study." Graves looked genuinely shocked. "But that's impossible, sir. The house was secured. I checked everything myself last night. Nevertheless, it's gone. I want every member of this household questioned. I want every room searched. Someone in this house took that stone, and I will have it back." The Charleston police were summoned. Within an hour, Detective Inspector William Hastings arrived at the Pemberton estate with 2 officers. Hastings was 52 years old, a veteran investigator known for methodical approach and unshakable composure. He'd solved some of Charleston's most complex crimes and had a reputation for seeing details others missed. Hastings examined the study carefully, taking notes, asking detailed questions. He paid particular attention to the crystal case, studying the lock mechanism, checking for any signs of tampering or damage. He found none. "This is a very sophisticated lock," he observed. "Custom-made, I'd guess. Do you have the only key, Mr. Pemberton?" "I do. I keep it on my person at all times." Harrison produced a small brass key from his vest pocket. "May I see it?" Harrison handed it over. Hastings examined it closely, then attempted to open the lock. The key turned smoothly, the case opened without resistance. He closed it again, locked it, and returned the key. "The mechanism works perfectly. No signs of forcing. If someone opened this case, they either picked the lock, which would be extremely difficult with this type of mechanism, or they had access to your key. No one had access to my key. It never leaves my possession. Could someone have made a copy?" Harrison considered. "I suppose it's theoretically possible, but when would they have done so? The key is always either on my person or locked in my bedroom safe at night." Hastings turned his attention to the room's security. He examined the door lock and found it equally sophisticated with no signs of forcing. The windows were securely latched from inside, and the glass panes showed no cracks or breaks. "Tell me about last evening," Hastings said. "You had guests here?" Harrison described the dinner party, listing everyone who'd attended. He explained that the male guests had spent time in the study after dinner, but he'd been present the entire time and had locked the room securely after everyone departed. Did anyone show unusual interest in the Sapphire? Several people glanced at it, but no one mentioned it. We were discussing business matters. And after the guests left, what did you do? I went upstairs to my bedroom. I locked the study door behind me. The next time I opened it was this morning when I discovered the theft. Hastings interviewed each member of the household separately. The servants all reported hearing nothing unusual during the night. No one had entered the study. No one had seen anything suspicious. Elizabeth's testimony was particularly detailed. She described the dinner party, the guests' behavior, and her father's routine afterward. When Hastings asked if she'd noticed anything unusual about any of the guests, she hesitated. "Daniel Ashford seemed distracted," she said finally. "He was quiet during dinner, which isn't like him. Usually he's quite talkative, trying to impress everyone. Do you think he could be involved? I don't know. It seems far-fetched. How would he have managed it? He left with the other guests, and the stone was still here at that point. Or at least Father says it was." Hastings picked up on this qualification. "You doubt your father's recollection?" "I don't doubt his honesty. But he was busy hosting. Is it possible he only assumed the Sapphire was in the case without actually verifying it?" It was a perceptive question. Hastings made a note to explore this possibility further. Jonathan Pemberton arrived mid-morning, summoned by a messenger. He listened to the situation with growing alarm. "This is catastrophic," he said to his father. "That stone was worth a fortune. Our insurance policy on it is substantial, but nowhere near its actual value. If we can't recover it, we're looking at a devastating financial loss." "I'm aware of that," Harrison snapped. "Do you think I care about the money right now? That sapphire was going to be our legacy. It was going to establish this family's name in history. Now it's gone, and with it our reputation." The search of the house took the entire day. Every room was examined, every piece of furniture moved, every potential hiding place investigated. The police even checked the cellar and attic. Nothing was found. By evening, Hastings had to admit he was baffled. "I've never encountered anything quite like this," he told Harrison. "A locked room mystery where every possible means of entry or exit has been eliminated. It's as though the stone simply vanished into thin air." "Are you suggesting supernatural intervention, Inspector?" "I'm suggesting that someone very clever has created an illusion of impossibility. There must be an explanation. We simply haven't discovered it yet." That night, the Pemberton household went to sleep under a cloud of confusion and suspicion. No one trusted anyone else. Servants whispered among themselves, speculating about who might be responsible. Elizabeth lay awake, her mind working through possibilities, unable to shake the feeling that she was missing something obvious. Harrison sat in his study, staring at the empty crystal case, feeling the weight of his loss like a physical presence in his chest. The following morning brought the first death. Albert Graves was found in his quarters behind the main house at 7 a.m. when he failed to appear for his usual duties. A housemaid sent to check on him discovered his body lying on the floor beside his bed. A doctor was summoned immediately. Dr. Samuel Whitmore, the Pemberton family physician, examined the body and determined that Graves had died sometime during the night, probably around 3 a.m., based on the body's condition. The cause of death appeared to be poisoning. Graves' lips were slightly blue, and there was a chemical smell about him that Whitmore recognized from his medical training. Cyanide, the doctor said grimly, or something similar. Fast-acting, extremely lethal. He wouldn't have suffered long. Detective Hastings, recalled to the estate, examined Graves' quarters carefully. On the nightstand beside the bed, he found a glass that had contained water. Residue at the bottom gave off a faint almond smell, confirming the doctor's diagnosis. He was poisoned, Hastings announced. The question is whether it was suicide or murder. Harrison was adamant. Graves would never kill himself. He was devoted to this family, to his work. He had no reason to despair. Unless he stole the Sapphire and guilt drove him to take his own life, Jonathan suggested. Elizabeth shook her head. That makes no sense. If Graves stole the Sapphire, where is it? His quarters have been searched. There's no sign of it. Hastings agreed. I'm inclined to think this was murder, not suicide. Someone wanted Graves silenced. Silenced why? Harrison demanded. What did he know? Perhaps he saw something the night of the theft. Perhaps he knew who took the stone. And perhaps the thief decided that knowledge made him too dangerous to live. This possibility cast the entire situation in a darker light. What had seemed like an audacious but non-violent theft was now entangled with murder. Whoever had taken the Sapphire was willing to kill to protect their secret. Hastings intensified his investigation. He interviewed everyone again, pressing for any detail they might have omitted in their first statements. He paid particular attention to the dinner party guests, bringing each of them in for formal questioning. Daniel Ashford's interview occurred 2 days after Graves' death. Daniel arrived at the police station promptly, dressed impeccably, his manner cooperative but slightly defensive. "I understand why you need to question me," he said. "I was present in the study that evening. But I assure you, Inspector, I had nothing to do with the theft or with Mr. Graves' death. Tell me about your relationship with the Pemberton family," Hastings began. Daniel explained his business dealings with Harrison, his social connections, his courtship of Elizabeth. "And how did you feel about the Sapphire?" Hastings asked. "Did you envy Mr. Pemberton's possession of such a stone?" Daniel smiled slightly. "Every man who saw that Sapphire envied it, Inspector. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. But envy doesn't make me a thief. Where were you on the night Albert Graves was murdered?" "At home, alone. I live by myself, so I have no witness to verify my whereabouts. I'm aware how that sounds. Did you know Mr. Graves personally?" "Only in passing. He seemed a competent man, devoted to his employer." "I was shocked to hear of his death." Hastings studied Daniel carefully throughout the interview, trying to detect any sign of deception. Daniel maintained steady eye contact, answered questions without hesitation, and showed no obvious nervousness. Yet something about him troubled Hastings, though he couldn't articulate exactly what. After releasing Daniel, Hastings returned to the Pemberton estate to continue his investigation. He'd been focusing on the mechanics of the theft, trying to understand how the Sapphire had been removed. But perhaps he'd been asking the wrong questions. He requested permission to speak with Elizabeth privately. They met in the drawing room with the door open for propriety's sake. "Miss Pemberton, I need you to be completely honest with me. What do you know about Daniel Ashford?" Elizabeth considered the question. "I know he's ambitious. I know he wants social position more than anything else. I know he sees me as a means to achieve that position. Do you think he's capable of theft?" I think ambitious men are capable of many things when they see an opportunity. Whether Daniel specifically would steal, I can't say with certainty. Is there anything else about him that strikes you as unusual or suspicious? Elizabeth hesitated. There is one thing, though I don't know if it's relevant. About a month ago, Daniel mentioned having traveled extensively in the Orient. He spent 2 years in India and Ceylon in his 20s, working for a British trading company. It's how he learned the cotton business. Hastings felt a surge of interest. Ceylon, where the sapphire was discovered. Yes, I noticed that coincidence when Father purchased the stone, but I didn't think much of it at the time. What else did he tell you about his time in Ceylon? Not much. He mostly talked about business opportunities and his frustration with British colonial attitudes. But now that you ask, I remember he seemed very knowledgeable about gemstones. At one point he mentioned having learned to evaluate precious stones during his time there, said it was a useful skill in his trade work. This was potentially significant. A man with knowledge of gemstones, experience in Ceylon, and ambition to rise in Charleston society. A man who'd been present in the study the night of the theft, and who had no solid alibi for the night Graves was murdered. But Hastings was too experienced to jump to conclusions. Circumstantial evidence wasn't enough. He needed to understand not just who might have taken the sapphire, but how they'd accomplished the impossible feat of removing it from a locked case in a locked room. He spent another hour examining the study, paying particular attention to the crystal case. The lock mechanism was indeed sophisticated, but locks could be picked if someone had the right tools and knowledge. Yet there were no scratches on the brass fittings, no marks that would indicate picks or other implements had been used. Frustrated, Hastings decided to try a different approach. He asked Harrison to demonstrate exactly what he'd done the evening of the dinner party. Harrison walked through his routine. He'd entered the study with his male guests around 8 p.m. He'd poured brandy, distributed cigars, and engaged in conversation. At no point had he opened the crystal case or removed the sapphire. I didn't want to make a display of it that evening, Harrison explained. Some of my guests had seen it before, and I thought it would seem like showing off to bring it out again. But the case was visible in the room? Yes, on that side table where it always sits. And you're certain the sapphire was inside at that point? Harrison paused. I saw the case. I assumed the stone was inside. I had no reason to think otherwise. So you didn't actually verify the stone's presence during or after the dinner party? No, I suppose I didn't. This was a crucial detail. If Harrison hadn't physically checked the sapphire that evening, it was possible the stone had already been stolen earlier in the day, before any guests arrived. The locked room mystery might be a red herring, a deliberate misdirection. Hastings began reconstructing the timeline more carefully. When was the last confirmed sighting of the sapphire in its case? After extensive questioning, he determined that the last person to actually see the stone was Mary Sullivan, the housemaid. She'd been cleaning the study 2 days before the dinner party and had noticed the sapphire while dusting near the crystal case. It was there on August 15th, Hastings said, and it was discovered missing on the morning of August 18th. That gives us a 3-day window, not just one night. This changed everything. The theft could have occurred at any point during those 3 days. The dinner party might be completely unrelated to the crime. Hastings interviewed Mary Sullivan again, pressing for any detail she might remember about her work in the study on August 15th. "Did you notice anything unusual that day?" he asked. Mary thought carefully. "The study door was unlocked when I arrived to clean, which was a bit unusual. Usually Mr. Pemberton locks it, but that day it was open. Was anyone else in the room?" "No, sir. But I heard voices in the hallway. Mr. Pemberton and someone else. I couldn't tell who. They were talking quietly." "Could you hear what they were saying?" "Not really, just fragments. Something about Ceylon and timing. I didn't pay much attention because I was focused on my work." Ceylon. There was that word again. Hastings felt certainty crystallizing in his mind. Daniel Ashford was connected to this somehow, but he still couldn't determine how the theft had been physically accomplished. That evening, the second death occurred. Thomas Pemberton, the youngest son who'd been absent since his argument with Harrison, was found dead in his rented rooms near the Charleston waterfront. His landlady discovered the body when Thomas failed to pay his rent and didn't respond to knocking. The cause of death was immediately apparent. Thomas had been shot once in the chest at close range. The room showed signs of struggle, furniture overturned, papers scattered. A pistol lay on the floor near the body, but initial examination suggested it wasn't the murder weapon. Hastings rushed to the scene. He examined the room carefully, noting the evidence of violence. This wasn't a suicide made to look like murder. This was a deliberate killing, probably during some kind of confrontation. Thomas's pockets had been turned out, his personal effects rifled through. Whoever killed him had been searching for something. Hastings found a crucial clue hidden beneath the bed, apparently kicked there during the struggle. It was a letter hastily written in Thomas's hand and dated the day after the Sapphire disappeared. The letter began, "E. I know what you're planning, and I know what you've done. We need to meet. There's more at stake here than you realize. T. E. Could that be Elizabeth? Or someone else entirely?" Hastings took the letter and returned to the Pemberton estate to question Elizabeth. He found her in the drawing room, reading. When he showed her the letter, her reaction was immediate and genuine shock. "Thomas wrote this to me?" "Apparently." "Do you know what he's referring to?" "I have no idea. I haven't spoken to Thomas since before the dinner party. He was angry at Father and spent most of his time with his artistic friends. Is it possible Thomas knew something about the Sapphire theft?" Elizabeth's eyes widened. "You think Thomas stole it?" "I think Thomas may have known who stole it, and that knowledge may have gotten him killed." The investigation had now expanded to include 2 murders and a theft that defied logical explanation. Hastings felt the pressure mounting. The Charleston newspapers had gotten wind of the story, and headlines screamed about the curse of the Pemberton Sapphire and the mystery of the impossible theft. Harrison Pemberton was devastated by Thomas's death. Whatever anger had existed between father and son evaporated in the face of this tragedy. Harrison aged visibly over the following days, his iron composure cracking to reveal genuine grief and, perhaps, guilt for the harsh words that had been their last interaction. The funeral was held 3 days later. Charleston society turned out in force, drawn by morbid curiosity as much as sympathy. Daniel Ashford attended, standing at the back of the church, his expression appropriately somber. Elizabeth noticed him there and felt a chill of suspicion she couldn't quite articulate. After the service, as mourners gathered at the Pemberton estate, Hastings took the opportunity to observe the interactions. He'd learned that criminals often betrayed themselves through small behaviors at such gatherings, unable to fully maintain their masks under emotional pressure. Daniel approached Elizabeth to offer condolences. "I'm terribly sorry about Thomas," he said quietly. "I know you and he were close. Were we?" Elizabeth replied, her tone sharper than social convention allowed. "I'm realizing I didn't know my brother as well as I thought. Apparently he knew things, secrets that got him killed." Daniel's expression flickered just for a moment. "What kind of secrets?" "That's what I intend to discover." She walked away, leaving Daniel standing alone. Hastings, who'd been watching from across the room, noted the exchange with interest. That evening, after the mourners had departed, Hastings requested a private meeting with Jonathan Pemberton. They met in the study, that room that had become the epicenter of tragedy. "Mr. Pemberton, I need to ask you about your father's business dealings, specifically any transactions involving Daniel Ashford." Jonathan seemed surprised by the question. "Daniel and my father have done business together for several years. Cotton contracts, shipping arrangements. Why? Has there ever been any conflict between them? Any deals that went badly?" Jonathan considered. "Nothing significant. Though I do recall Father mentioning that Daniel had tried to purchase partnership in one of our warehouses last year. Father refused. He didn't want to dilute family ownership. How did Daniel react?" "I don't know. Father handled it directly. But I got the impression Daniel wasn't pleased." This was interesting. A rejected business proposal could provide motive. If Daniel couldn't gain entry into the Pemberton inner circle through legitimate means, perhaps he decided to take something valuable from them instead. But Hastings still couldn't solve the fundamental problem. How had the theft been accomplished? He spent another hour in the study that evening, examining every surface, every angle. The crystal case sat on its table, still locked, still empty, a monument to an unsolved puzzle. Hastings walked to the windows and looked out at the gardens. It was dusk, the light fading. From this vantage point he could see the entire rear lawn, the formal gardens, the smaller buildings beyond. Something nagged at his mind. He'd been assuming the thief had entered through the door or windows. But what if there was another way? He examined the walls more carefully, tapping along the panels, searching for any hidden passages or concealed doors. Old houses sometimes had such features, built for servants to move unseen or for families to hide valuables during times of unrest. After 20 minutes of searching, he found it. Behind a large bookshelf on the eastern wall, barely visible, was a seam in the paneling. When he pressed on it in a specific spot, a section of wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. Hastings felt triumph surge through him. This was how it had been done. Someone had known about this passage and used it to enter the study without going through the locked door. He called for Harrison and showed him the discovery. The elderly man stared at the opening in shock. "I had no idea this existed," Harrison said. "This house is over 100 years old. There could be passages throughout that we don't know about." They explored the passage, which ran between the walls and led down to a small storage room on the first floor. The storage room had an exterior door that opened into the gardens. So someone could have entered from outside, used this passage to reach your study, taken the Sapphire and departed the same way, Hastings said, all without being seen by anyone in the household. But how did they know about the passage? That's an excellent question. Hastings traced the passage more carefully. It was dusty, showing clear signs of recent use. Footprints in the dust, handprints on the walls where someone had steadied themselves in the narrow space. He followed the footprints down to the storage room. The exterior door showed signs of having been recently oiled, its hinges moving silently. Someone had prepared this escape route carefully. In the storage room, Hastings found another crucial piece of evidence, a small leather case, hidden behind some old crates. Inside the case were specialized tools, the kind used by professional thieves. Lock picks, small chisels, a diamond-tipped glass cutter. But there was something else in the case. A folded piece of paper with architectural drawings. Hastings unfolded it and found himself looking at detailed plans of the Pemberton mansion, including notations about the hidden passages. At the bottom of the page, in small neat handwriting, was a signature. Architectural Survey, prepared by Thomas Pemberton, July 1873. Thomas, the youngest son, had created these drawings. He'd known about the passages and had documented them. But why? Hastings felt pieces of the puzzle beginning to align. Thomas had argued with his father about the Sapphire. Thomas had written a mysterious letter about knowing what E was planning. Thomas had been murdered by someone searching his room. What if Thomas hadn't been a victim but a participant? What if he'd helped someone steal the Sapphire, providing them with architectural knowledge and access? And then what if he'd had second thoughts, threatened to reveal the truth, and been killed for his betrayal? But who had he been working with? The letter referred to E. Could that be Elizabeth after all? Hastings rushed back upstairs and found Elizabeth in her room. He showed her the architectural drawings. Did you know Thomas had created these? Elizabeth examined them, her expression changing from curiosity to understanding. Thomas mentioned he was documenting the house's original features. He found it historically interesting. But I had no idea he'd discovered hidden passages. Look at the date, July 1873, just a month before the theft. You think Thomas was involved in stealing the Sapphire? I think Thomas helped someone steal it. And I think that someone might have been... He stopped. Elizabeth was looking at the drawings more carefully, and her face had gone pale. What is it? Hastings asked. She pointed to a notation on the plans, barely legible in the corner. It read, "Passage entrance confirmed with EA key provided." EA, Elizabeth said quietly. Edward Ashford. Daniel's deceased father. Thomas must have consulted with someone who knew this house's original construction. Or, Hastings said, a darker possibility forming. E.A. could stand for someone else entirely. But Elizabeth had already made the connection. Evelyn Ashford, Daniel's younger sister. Hastings felt the case suddenly shifting. Daniel has a sister? Had a sister? She died 5 years ago. But she and Thomas were friends when they were younger, before the Ashford social circumstances deteriorated. I'd forgotten about her entirely. Tell me about her. Elizabeth's memory of Evelyn Ashford was vague, colored by years of not thinking about someone from her past. But as she spoke, details emerged. Evelyn had been artistic, intelligent, close to Thomas in temperament. The two of them had spent time together, exploring old buildings in Charleston, fascinated by architectural history. If Evelyn knew about these passages, Hastings said slowly, she could have told Daniel before she died. Given him knowledge he later used to commit the theft, but this still didn't explain everything. Even with access through the secret passage, how had Daniel opened the locked crystal case? The lock showed no signs of tampering, no evidence that picks or tools had been used. Hastings returned to the study once more, this time bringing the tools he'd found in the storage room. He examined the crystal case under better light, using a magnifying glass to inspect every detail. And then he saw it. A tiny scratch on the brass fitting, so small it was almost invisible. But once he knew what to look for, other details became apparent. The velvet cushion inside the case sat slightly askew, as though it had been removed and replaced imperfectly. Hastings carefully lifted the cushion and found what he was looking for, a small compartment beneath it, accessible from underneath the case. The case's bottom panel was hinged, designed to allow access for maintenance or adjustment. Someone with knowledge of this feature could have reached up through the secret passage, removed the bottom panel, extracted the sapphire from below, and replaced everything without ever needing to unlock the top of the case. It was elegant. It was sophisticated, and it required intimate knowledge of both the house's architecture and the case's construction. Hastings now had a clear theory of how the crime had been committed, but he still needed evidence linking Daniel Ashford definitively to the theft and to the murders. That evidence came from an unexpected source. The following morning, a woman appeared at the police station asking to speak with Detective Inspector Hastings. She gave her name as Margaret Pemberton, Jonathan's wife, and said she had information relevant to the investigation. Hastings received her in his office. Margaret was a composed woman in her early 30s, known for her intelligence and discretion. Whatever had brought her to the police station, it had taken considerable resolve. "Inspector, I've struggled with whether to come forward with this," she began. "But after Thomas's death, I feel I have no choice. My husband told me not to get involved, but I can't remain silent when a murderer might go free. What information do you have, Mrs. Pemberton?" Margaret took a breath. 3 weeks ago, I was visiting the estate to take tea with Elizabeth. I arrived earlier than expected and let myself in through the garden entrance. As I was walking through the lower hallway, I heard voices coming from the storage room you've been investigating. Hastings leaned forward. "What voices?" "Thomas and Daniel Ashford. They were arguing about something. I couldn't hear everything, but I distinctly heard Daniel say, 'You promised me access.' 'I've paid you enough for it.' And Thomas replied, 'I'm having second thoughts. This is my family. The sapphire isn't yours to take. Did they see you?' 'No.' I retreated quickly and went around to the front entrance. When I mentioned to Elizabeth that I'd arrived early, she said nothing about Thomas being on the property, so I assumed he'd left before anyone else knew he was there. Why didn't you come forward with this immediately after the theft?" Margaret looked down at her hands. "Because I didn't want to believe Thomas was involved. He was family. And I convinced myself I might have misunderstood what I heard. But after his murder, I realized my silence might be protecting a killer. This was the evidence Hastings needed. A witness placing Daniel and Thomas together, discussing the theft before it occurred, combined with the architectural plans, the secret passage, and Daniel's knowledge of Ceylon and gemstones, it was enough to build a case. Hastings obtained a warrant for Daniel Ashford's arrest that afternoon. He assembled a team of officers and proceeded to Daniel's residence, a well-appointed townhouse in Charleston's commercial district. They found the house empty. Daniel had departed 2 hours earlier, according to his housekeeper, taking several trunks and saying he had urgent business in Savannah he was fleeing. Hastings immediately dispatched telegrams to authorities in Savannah and other nearby cities, providing Daniel's description and instructions to detain him. Then he ordered a thorough search of Daniel's house. What they found in Daniel's study was damning. Hidden in a locked drawer wrapped in black velvet was a leather journal detailing an elaborate plan to steal the Pemberton Sapphire. The entries began in May, after Daniel had attended the viewing at Harrison's house. The journal revealed a calculated scheme. Daniel had approached Thomas Pemberton, knowing the young man's resentment toward his father. He'd offered Thomas money in exchange for architectural information and access to the house. Thomas, bitter about his father's preference for the Sapphire over his own son, had agreed. On the night of August 16th, while the household slept, Daniel had entered through the garden door, navigated the secret passage, and removed the Sapphire from beneath the case. The entire operation had taken less than 10 minutes. But then complications had arisen. Albert Graves, unable to sleep that night, had been walking the grounds when he'd glimpsed someone moving in the shadows near the garden door. He hadn't seen enough to identify Daniel, but he'd mentioned to Thomas the next day that he'd seen something suspicious. Thomas, already regretting his role in the theft, realized Graves was a threat. He'd written to Elizabeth trying to warn her, or perhaps trying to unburden himself of guilt. That letter had been the beginning of his downfall. Daniel, learning of Graves' suspicions through Thomas, had decided to eliminate the risk. He'd visited Graves on the night of August 18th, poisoning his water while the man slept. Then he'd turned his attention to Thomas, whose guilt was making him increasingly dangerous. The journal entries became darker in tone as Daniel rationalized his actions. What had begun as theft had escalated to murder, then to a second murder. Each crime justified the next in Daniel's mind. He'd come too far to turn back. The final entry, dated 2 days before his flight, read, "They're closing in. Hastings suspects. Elizabeth knows something. I should have killed her too when I had the chance. The Sapphire is worth nothing if I hang for these crimes. Must leave Charleston. Savannah first, then abroad. The stone will sell in London or Paris. Far from here I can start over. The Pembertons will never stop hunting me, but distance and new identity will provide safety. They got what they deserved. Old money, old names, thinking they owned the world. I showed them they own nothing except what they can keep. It was a confession written in arrogance and desperation. But where was the Sapphire itself? Hastings tore Daniel's house apart searching for it. They checked every conceivable hiding place, examined every piece of furniture, even pulled up floorboards. The stone was nowhere to be found. Daniel had it with him. He was fleeing with the 247-carat star sapphire that would be instantly recognizable to any knowledgeable jeweler. That fact would make him easier to track. 2 days later, word came from Savannah. Daniel Ashford had been spotted at the harbor, attempting to book passage on a merchant ship bound for Liverpool. When confronted by local police, he'd tried to run. In the ensuing chase, he'd been cornered on one of the docks. What happened next would be debated in newspapers for weeks. Some witnesses claimed Daniel had slipped while trying to jump from one dock to another. Others insisted he'd jumped deliberately, choosing death over capture. Either way, the result was the same. Daniel Ashford plunged into the Savannah harbor and never resurfaced. Divers searched for his body for 3 days, but found nothing. The harbor's currents were strong, and the water was murky with sediment. Daniel had vanished into the depths, taking the Pemberton Sapphire with him. The case was declared closed. Daniel's journal provided ample evidence of his guilt. The means and motive were established. 2 murders and a spectacular theft solved, even if the principal evidence, the sapphire itself, was lost. But Elizabeth Pemberton wasn't satisfied with this resolution. She knew something was wrong with the official narrative, something that didn't quite align. 3 weeks after Daniel's supposed death, Elizabeth received an unexpected visitor at the Pemberton estate. It was a woman she'd never met, elegantly dressed in mourning clothes, with a veil obscuring her face. "Miss Pemberton," the woman said when they were alone in the drawing room, "my name is Evelyn Ashford. I believe you thought I was dead." Elizabeth felt the floor seem to tilt beneath her. "That's impossible. You died 5 years ago." "That's what my brother wanted people to believe." It was easier for his social climbing if people thought he had no family connections to account for. I was an embarrassment to him, you see. Too outspoken, too independent. So I went away, changed my name, and built a different life. Why are you here?" Evelyn removed her veil, revealing a face that was indeed familiar from childhood memories. "Because Daniel wasn't the thief, Miss Pemberton. I was." Elizabeth's mind reeled. "You stole the sapphire?" "I did. With Thomas's help, though he didn't fully understand what he was assisting with. Thomas thought we were documenting historical architecture. He had no idea I was planning to rob your father. But Daniel's journal was a forgery. I created it and planted it in his house. Daniel discovered what I'd done after the theft. He confronted me, threatened to expose me, unless I gave him the sapphire. When I refused, he tried to blackmail me, said he'd tell the police I was alive and responsible for the crime. Elizabeth struggled to process this. "So you killed him?" "No. Daniel died exactly as reported. He was fleeing. He fell. The harbor took him. But I let everyone believe he was guilty because it served my purposes. The sapphire disappeared with him, or so the story goes. No one would look for it if they thought it was at the bottom of the harbor." "You're confessing to me. Why?" Evelyn's expression softened. "Because Thomas deserves better than to be remembered as a thief who betrayed his family. He was a good person, Miss Pemberton. He helped me because I told him I needed architectural drawings for an artistic project. He had no idea what I was really planning. When he realized what had happened, when he understood I'd used him, he was devastated. That guilt you saw, that regret, it was genuine. He didn't help you steal it. No, Daniel did that without my knowledge. He discovered my plans, followed me through the passage that night, and decided to steal the sapphire for himself. He removed it before I could. By the time I realized what had happened, Daniel had the stone and was trying to leverage it to control me. What about Graves and Thomas's murder? Daniel killed Graves to protect himself. But Thomas's death, Evelyn's voice broke. That was my fault. I confronted Thomas about his letter to you. We argued. He said he was going to tell the truth, clear his conscience. I tried to stop him. We struggled, and the gun went off. It was an accident, Miss Pemberton. I never meant to hurt him. Thomas was one of the few people who'd ever treated me with genuine kindness." Elizabeth felt tears streaming down her face. "Then turn yourself in. Face justice for what you've done." "I could do that, but I came here to offer you a choice. The sapphire is in a safe place. I can return it to your family anonymously if you agree to let the official story stand." Let people believe Daniel was guilty. Let me disappear again, this time permanently. Or I can turn myself in, and the Sapphire remains lost forever, because I'll never reveal its location. It was an impossible choice. Justice for Thomas, or the return of her family's most valuable possession. The truth, or a comfortable lie that protected everyone's reputation. "Why should I trust you?" Elizabeth asked. "Why should I believe you'd actually return the Sapphire?" "Because I never wanted it for myself," Evelyn said quietly. "I wanted to hurt your father, to punish him for the business practices that destroyed my family's fortune 20 years ago. Harrison Pemberton ruined my father through ruthless competition, drove him to bankruptcy and early death. This was revenge, Miss Pemberton. But I've learned that revenge solves nothing. It only creates more pain." She placed a small card on the table. "This is an address in Atlanta. If you decide to let the official story stand, send a telegram to that address with the word mercy. Within a week, the Sapphire will be delivered to a location I'll specify. If I don't hear from you within 3 days, I'll assume you've chosen justice over recovery, and I'll surrender myself to the authorities." Evelyn stood to leave. At the door, she paused. "For what it's worth, Miss Pemberton, I'm sorry. Sorry for Thomas, sorry for the pain I've caused your family. Some sins can't be forgiven, but perhaps some can be at least partially atoned for." Then she was gone, disappearing into the Charleston evening as mysteriously as she'd arrived. Elizabeth sat alone in the drawing-room for hours, turning over Evelyn's words, weighing impossible options. She thought about Thomas, her troubled, sensitive brother who'd been used and ultimately killed. She thought about her father, who'd valued a stone over his relationships with his children. She thought about justice and mercy, truth and expedience. Finally, she made her decision. The telegram sent to Atlanta the following day contained a single word: truth. Elizabeth went to Detective Inspector Hastings and told him everything Evelyn had revealed. A warrant was issued for Evelyn Ashford's arrest. But when police arrived at the Atlanta address, they found it abandoned. Evelyn had vanished, and this time there was no trail to follow. The Pemberton Sapphire was never recovered. Some believe it was sold abroad, its distinctive appearance somehow disguised, or the stone itself recut to hide its identity. Others think Evelyn truly did throw it into the ocean, destroying evidence of her crimes. A few romantics claim it's still hidden somewhere, waiting to be discovered by future generations. The Pemberton family never recovered from the scandal. Harrison died 6 months later. Some said of a broken heart. Others said of guilt for the role his obsessions had played in destroying his family. Jonathan inherited what remained of the family business, but struggled to restore its reputation. Within a decade, the Pemberton name had faded from Charleston's elite circles. Elizabeth never married. She devoted her life to social reform work, particularly advocating for women's education and independence. In her private journals, discovered after her death in 1921, she wrote extensively about the Sapphire case and her decision to prioritize truth over recovery. One entry, dated December 1873, 4 months after the theft, reads, "People ask if I regret my choice, if I wish I'd taken Evelyn's offer and recovered the stone. I tell them no, though sometimes I wonder. The Sapphire represented everything wrong with my family, our values, our priorities. We thought we could possess beauty, own it, control it, but beautiful things have a way of escaping those who try to cage them. Perhaps the stone is better lost a reminder that not everything can be bought or owned, not even by those with the wealth to purchase kingdoms. The mystery of the Pemberton Sapphire resonated far beyond Charleston. It became a symbol of the corruption and moral decay that characterized America's Gilded Age, that period when vast fortunes were amassed without regard for human cost, when objects were valued more than people, when appearance mattered more than character. The case also highlighted the invisible women whose stories rarely made it into historical records. Evelyn Ashford was a woman crushed by economic circumstances beyond her control, denied opportunities because of her gender, erased from her own brother's life because she didn't fit his ambitions. Her crime was terrible, but the desperation that drove her to it reflected larger injustices in the society that surrounded her. What makes the Sapphire cipher truly fascinating isn't just the mechanics of the theft, though those remain impressive even by modern standards. It's the psychological complexity of everyone involved. Thomas, torn between family loyalty and resentment. Daniel, willing to kill to protect a theft he hadn't even committed. Evelyn, seeking revenge for her father's ruin, but finding only more destruction. Elizabeth, choosing principle over pragmatism, even when it cost her family dearly. Harrison, learning too late that obsession with legacy can destroy the very thing you're trying to preserve. The 7 missing pages from the police report remain a mystery. Historians have speculated endlessly about what they contained. Some think they documented Evelyn's confession to police before she fled. Others believe they contained evidence of official corruption, payments made to suppress parts of the investigation. A few conspiracy theorists claim the pages revealed that the Sapphire was cursed, carrying with it a supernatural element that rational investigators couldn't explain. The truth is probably simpler. Those pages likely contained testimony that embarrassed powerful families, details about social connections and business dealings that prominent Charleston citizens wanted erased from public record. The Gilded Age was built on such erasures, inconvenient truths swept away to preserve reputations and maintain the illusion of respectability. Today, if you visit Charleston, you can see the Pemberton Mansion, though it's been converted into a museum. The study where the Sapphire was kept is preserved much as it was in 1873. Tour guides tell the story of the impossible theft, pointing out the hidden passage that was discovered during the investigation. The crystal case is long gone, sold after Harrison's death, but photographs of it exist in the Charleston Historical Society archives. Sometimes, late at night, museum security guards report strange occurrences in that study. Sounds of footsteps in the walls, shadows moving in the passage, the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. Skeptics dismiss these as imagination, the power of suggestion working on people who know the room's dark history. But others wonder if perhaps some mysteries never truly rest. If objects of great beauty and great price carry with them echoes of the obsessions they inspired, the lives they destroyed, the crimes they motivated. The Pemberton Sapphire may be lost, but its influence lingers in the empty space where it once sat, a reminder of all the beauty that was bought, stolen, and ultimately lost in pursuit of possession without purpose. The case remains officially unsolved. Evelyn Ashford was never captured. The Sapphire was never recovered. Daniel Ashford's body was never found. 3 people died and a family's fortune was destroyed, all for a stone that may now sit at the bottom of the ocean or in some private collection far from Charleston, its history forgotten, its beauty admired without understanding the blood that stained its acquisition. What do you think happened to the Pemberton Sapphire? Do you believe Evelyn's confession, or was there yet another layer to this intricate deception? Was Elizabeth right to choose truth over recovery, or should she have taken the offer and reclaimed her family's treasure? These questions matter because they're not really about a 19th century theft. They're about the choices we all face between principle and pragmatism, between justice and mercy, between truth and comfortable lies. The Gilded Age might be long past, but the moral dilemmas it presented remain eternally relevant. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us if you'd have made Elizabeth's choice, or if you'd have sent that telegram seeking the Sapphire's return. And if you found this story compelling, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into history's greatest mysteries, the crimes that shocked generations, the scandals that refuse to stay buried. Share this video with someone who loves historical mysteries and impossible crimes. These stories deserve to be remembered, and you can help ensure they're never forgotten. Until next time, keep questioning everything you thought you knew about the past. Sometimes the most valuable treasures aren't the ones we can hold in our hands, but the truths we're brave enough to face. History is full of mysteries like this, crimes that seemed impossible until someone looked at them from a different angle, found the hidden passage, discovered the secret that everyone missed. The Pemberton Sapphire taught Charleston society a painful lesson, that obsession with possession can destroy everything it touches, that beauty can become a curse when we try too hard to own it, and that sometimes the greatest mystery isn't how something was stolen, but why we valued it so much in the first place. The Sapphire Cipher remains one of America's most fascinating unsolved cases, a perfect intersection of impossible crime, social commentary, and human tragedy. It reminds us that the past isn't dead or even really past. It lives in the stories we tell, the mysteries we can't solve, and the questions that continue to haunt us long after everyone involved has turned to dust. And somewhere, perhaps in a private collection or at the bottom of the ocean, or hidden in some forgotten location, waiting to be discovered, the Pemberton Sapphire might still exist, its star still glowing, its beauty unchanged by time, still carrying the weight of all the lives it touched and destroyed, still asking the question that has no easy answer: what price are we willing to pay for the things we desire?